Welcome back to the Ghost Vault. Today we dive into some spine-tingling stories that will leave you questioning reality. So grab a cozy spot and let's get started. My lost brother reached out from beyond. This happened when I was 12 and it still haunts me. My older brother, who I idolized, passed away in a car accident when he was 18. It shattered our family. I didn't just lose a sibling, I lost my best friend, my role model. My parents were devastated, and the house felt so empty without him. 6 months after his death, I started getting weird phone calls. It wasn't unusual to get wrong numbers back then, so I didn't think much of it. But every call had the same thing: silence. Just complete eerie silence, followed by a click, like someone was hanging up. Then one night I was home alone. My parents were out for dinner, and I was watching TV. The phone rang. I picked it up, expecting another silent call. But instead I heard something different this time. A voice. His voice. My brother whispered my name. Not in a creepy horror movie way, but softly, like he was just calling me from another room. "Hey little sis," he said. I froze. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. "Don't worry, everything's okay," he added. Then the call disconnected. I sat there shaking, staring at the phone. I called the number back, but it was disconnected. To this day, I've never figured out where the call came from. My parents brushed it off as a dream, but I know what I heard. It wasn't a dream, it was him, the time traveler in my photos. I'm not one to believe in time travel, but this is the one thing I can't explain. Back in 2014, I was cleaning out old photo albums with my grandmother. She was going through pictures of her youth, her wedding, my mom's childhood, just basic family stuff. Until we came across one photo that made my heart skip a beat. It was a black and white photo of my grandmother standing with a group of friends, probably from the late 1940s. But in the corner of the photo, half hidden in the shadows, was me. I mean, it looked exactly like me. Same hair, same build, even the same distinct scar I have on my chin from a bike accident when I was a kid. I pointed it out to my grandmother, and she just laughed. "Oh, that's one of your great uncles," she said. "He had a scar just like yours." "But don't worry, you're much better looking," I chuckled, but it still felt off. There was no way this guy could have looked that much like me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was me. But how? I've heard stories about people encountering their doppelgangers, but this was different. It wasn't just a resemblance, it was like looking at a photograph of myself from a different era. I still have the photo, and every time I look at it, I get the same chills down my spine. I don't have an explanation for it, but sometimes when I lie awake at night, I wonder, did I somehow travel back in time without knowing it? The night my son saved my life before he was born. This is probably the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to me, and to this day I have no explanation. I was 7 months pregnant, and like most expectant mothers, I was paranoid about everything. Was the baby moving enough? Was I eating right? You know, all the typical worries. But one night I had a dream that was anything but typical. In the dream, I was lying in bed exactly as I was in real life. But instead of feeling tired, I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, like something bad was about to happen. I looked over, and standing at the foot of my bed was a boy around 5 or 6 years old. He had curly hair and bright green eyes. I didn't recognize him, but somehow I knew. He was my son. He looked at me with an expression that was both stern and concerned. "Mum," he said, "you need to wake up." Now the voice was so clear and forceful that it jolted me awake in real life. The room was pitch dark, but I had this deep, unsettling feeling in my gut. I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. I sat up and, out of nowhere, felt an intense pain in my lower abdomen. It was so sudden and sharp that I nearly blacked out. I woke my husband, and he rushed me to the hospital. It turned out I had a placental abruption, a condition that could have been fatal if we hadn't gotten there in time. Our son was born healthy 2 months later, and here's the kicker: he has the same curly hair and green eyes as the boy from my dream. Every time I look at him, I wonder, did he somehow warn me before he was even born? The stranger who knew my secret. This happened last year and still freaks me out. I was sitting at a coffee shop, reading a book, when a man sat down across from me. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a long grey beard and a worn-out coat. He looked like any other stranger you'd see at a cafe until he spoke. "You shouldn't feel guilty," he said. I looked up, confused. "Sorry," I asked, thinking I must have misheard him. He just smiled and said, "You did what you had to do. You saved yourself. She would have wanted that." I felt my stomach drop. He was talking about my mother. She passed away 3 years ago after a long battle with cancer, and in her final days, I made the hardest decision in my life. I chose to take her off life support. It was something I'd never told anyone outside my immediate family, and even then, I didn't like to talk about it. I had carried that guilt with me every day since. But this man, this total stranger, somehow knew. He just sat there looking at me with kind eyes, as if he understood everything I'd been going through. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. Was this some kind of cruel joke? Was he psychic? Before I could ask him anything, he stood up, nodded, and walked out of the cafe. I never saw him again. But that one encounter still haunts me. How could he have known? Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more? The deja vu apartment. I moved into my current apartment 2 years ago, and from day one it felt familiar, like I'd been here before. Every corner, every room, it all seemed to echo something deep in my memory. I chalked it up to a weird sense of deja vu until one night, something strange happened that still creeps me out. I was going through some old photos that I'd kept in a box from my childhood. You know, those random snapshots from school trips, family vacations, and birthday parties. As I was flipping through the stack, one photo made my heart stop. It was a picture of me as a child, maybe 8 years old, standing in front of a building. The building was unmistakably my current apartment. Same entrance, same windows, even the same old brick facade. But here's the thing, I had never been to the city as a kid. We lived hundreds of miles away, and as far as I know, my family had no connection to this place at all. I called my mum to ask if we'd ever traveled here when I was younger. She swore we hadn't. I even showed her the photo, but she couldn't explain it either. The only thing she remembered was that the photo was taken on some random trip we made to visit a distant cousin, though she couldn't recall any details. I have no explanation for it. It's as if my life was destined to loop back to this place, as if I was meant to live here all along. Every time I look at that photo, I feel like my entire life has been guided by some invisible thread, pulling me back to this one apartment, the taxi that never left. This story still freaks me out. It happened about 5 years ago, and I've never been able to explain it. I was in a rush to get to the airport and flagged down a taxi on the street. The driver was an older man, quiet, didn't say much other than asking where I needed to go. I gave him the address and we started driving. Halfway through the ride, something about the taxi started feeling off. It had an old-timey vibe, like it hadn't been updated in decades. There were no ads playing on a screen, no electronic meter, just a little dial ticking away in front. I didn't think much of it at the time since I was so focused on getting to the airport. When we arrived, I handed him cash, thanked him, and ran inside to catch my flight. It wasn't until later, while I was sitting at my gate, that I realized something was wrong. I couldn't remember hearing the sound of the taxi driving away. You know that distinct hum of the engine and the screech of the tires? Nothing. The street had been silent when I left. The thought bothered me, so after my trip I decided to look up the taxi service to file a review. But when I entered the license plate number I'd memorized, nothing came up. No records. It was like that taxi never existed. I even checked with the city's taxi commission, but they told me that plate had been decommissioned years ago. The driver who'd used it had passed away in an accident a long time before I'd ever gotten in the cab. Who or what drove me to the airport that day, I'll never know. The stranger who predicted my future. I was out shopping one day when an older woman approached me out of nowhere. She wasn't dressed like a beggar, but she looked tired and worn down by life. I figured she was going to ask for money, so I reached for my wallet. But instead, she grabbed my arm, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You're going to meet someone today who will change your life. Don't let them go." I stood there, stunned, as she walked away before I could even respond. I thought about it for a second, then brushed it off as just a weird interaction. But the rest of the day, her words echoed in my mind. Later that afternoon, I was at a coffee shop when I bumped into a woman trying to balance her coffee and phone. I apologized, we laughed about it, and ended up talking for hours. We exchanged numbers, and as we said goodbye, it hit me this was the person the old woman was talking about. 2 years later, that woman is now my wife. Every time I think about how we met, I can't help but remember the old lady's words. It's like she knew something I didn't. Like she saw my future unfolding before I even lived it. The ghost in the family photo? A couple of years ago, my parents dug out an old family photo album and we started flipping through pictures. Everything was normal me and my siblings as kids, family vacations, birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then we came across a photo that no one could explain. It was a group shot of my extended family at a barbecue, but in the background, standing just a few feet behind us, was a man we didn't recognize. He wasn't a family member, and no one at the barbecue remembered him being there. At first, we thought he might have been a passerby who accidentally ended up in the shot. But the more we looked at the photo, the stranger it got. The man was pale, almost translucent, and his clothes looked out of place, like something you'd see in a black and white film. My grandmother, who was with us at the time, took one look at the photo and gasped. She said the man looked exactly like her father, my great-grandfather, who had passed away decades before the picture was taken. She swore it was him, right down to the way he stood and the way his shirt was tucked into his pants. No one else could explain it. To this day, we don't know how or why my great-grandfather's ghost ended up in our family photo, the lost dog who found his way back. I had a dog named Max when I was a kid, and he was my best friend. We did everything together, he was always by my side. But one summer day when I was about 10, Max ran away. We searched everywhere, put up flyers, and even called local shelters, but there was no sign of him. I was devastated. Weeks turned into months, and eventually we gave up hope of ever finding him. Years passed, and I moved on, though I never forgot about Max. Fast forward 10 years. I'm now living in a different city halfway across the country, and one day while I'm walking home, I see a dog sitting outside my apartment building. He looked exactly like Max. I thought, no way, it can't be, but something in me just knew. I called his name and the dog came running up to me, wagging his tail like he recognized me. I couldn't believe it. There was no logical explanation for how he could have found me, especially after all those years and so far from home. I took him to the vet, and sure enough, the microchip confirmed it was Max. To this day, I have no idea how he found his way back to me, but it felt like we were always meant to be together. Some things, I guess, are just meant to happen, no matter how impossible they seem. Thanks for joining me in the Ghost Vault today. If you enjoyed these eerie tales, don't forget to share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. Until next time, keep your minds open and your hearts curious.